So can I have all my panel members up? I don't know if will we need the microphone to chuck around or? Am I okay? Yeah, in fact, you guys are everybody. Okay.
Right.
Okay, have you got any questions in the audience?
I've got a question from Malcolm. Yeah.
Speaking of.
Here we go. Is that working?
Yes.
So a question from Malcolm. The South City Way was the first of the major infrastructure to go in. And as a frequent user, I have criticisms of it. It was also heralded as the exemplar of what was going ahead, and that would be based on that. I think there are a lot of lessons that could have been learned from the South City Way. Did you learn lessons from that? And if so, what were they?
So in terms of that, you know, I would say that one of the things that you really have to remember is that the cycle design, the pace it moves at is really, really quick. You know, we started the Connecting Woodside project 2017. So, you know, the design for Garscoop Road was done in 2017. St George's Road was 2019. So yeah, it gets tweaked as you go along. But you can find by the time you procure somebody to build it, go through all the design, actually construct it, the design choices that you made in those, you know, potentially 3 to 4 years before it was built become out of date. You know, so that's one of the things I would say. Secondly, in terms of South City Way, it's not particularly, it's a different style of route. You know, if I was looking at a route that had like a highly built up area, in terms of Garscoop Road, it's not particularly that. And then St George's Road itself, it's got elements of that, but it's not quite the same. So it's not something that it's unidirectional compared to sort of bidirectional. So I'm not sure if you would be driving at side road junction choices, but you know, in terms of what I would look to do, what I showed was how I would approach that.
I'm really very much thinking about the side road junctions because some of them are very aggressively flared going across the South City Way, and they give me the fear when I go near them. And that shouldn't be like that on a cycleway. And I would like to know that you would be avoiding those sorts of junctions in the future.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, look, again, on Garscoop Road, you're looking at, and I showed the picture of the HGV coming out, but the thing, you have to design for what that area or that route that's been installed in, what kind of traffic it's got to cope with. So, you know, sometimes there's not a particular way around that, but if you're raising the carriageway, you should be.
Well, they actually took out, there were raised tables in the design for the South City Way. They removed in the final build.
I can't comment.
It's the case, yeah. Butterbiggins Road was one.
Oh. Thanks. I think it's perhaps a question for both of you over there. I've had a couple of holidays on the continent. We're in France recently, been to Brussels, and there are lots of zebra crossings. Now, as a child, well, I'm not quite sure when we stopped using zebra crossings, but they always had Belisha beacons, didn't they, in the UK? You see all these in other countries that don't. If you're standing just probably within a metre of a zebra crossing, cars will stop. You know, and you almost feel you've got to go across, even if you didn't mean to. We now have zebra crossings on cycle lanes, but I'm sure lots of people won't ever remember there being zebra crossings with the Belisha beacon that cars were expected to stop at when you're expected to put your foot just down on the crossing to indicate that you wanted to cross. And we don't have that now. So I wonder why you expect people on bikes to stop on a cycle lane when we've stopped using zebra crossings on a road. And just if there's any sort of reason or explanation for that change.
So look, you know, in terms of that, it's something that actually really frustrates me, because as a designer, like I say, this is an internationally recognized piece of like infrastructure. Everybody knows what to do, regardless of Belisha beacons or not. That to me, I would say, like, in terms of people obeying that's potentially a behavioural issue as opposed to a design issue, which isn't passing the buck.
I'll add. It's interesting when we talk about other countries, and back to my analogy with this movie, when you've got infrastructure like that in countries where there's a good uptake on cycling and even walking, just pedestrians, so your Denmark, your Holland, Belgium, France, then there is a different psyche in the driver. They're more used to it, they're more accepting of it. And it frustrates me because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, what about here? If I go to the other end, you should look at dash cam videos from Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, right? And see how much product a pedestrian has on one of these crossings, and it's absolutely horrific. And there was a presentation, I think it was a year or a couple of years ago, that was somebody doing investigations into zebra crossings, and when they started putting, you know, in London you get these schemes that have got funny colours on the roads and all that up to the crossings, and the people in a number of our neighbouring countries on the continent were saying, we actually love your road zebra crossing because it has the zigzags and things, and they're really, really clear, but our ones just have a blue sign and the marking. So it's all kind of swings and roundabouts, and it's all a lot's down to, you know, the psyche, how people respond to the different situations.
Right.
Well, thanks.
Can I just add to that quickly? There's a really good bit of research by Professor Ian Walker, which talks about motor normativity, and the UK is a really motor normative place. So cars dominate our streets and how we think. And if you go to the continent, that's not really the case. And I was just in Spain last week, and you're very lucky to have me back, I have to tell you. But you, as you say, you go up to it, you approach, you kind of feel like a nuisance for not crossing the road. And that concept of motor normativity is really worth, there's a really good GCN video as well, if you want to check that out on YouTube. It's worth having a look at.
Thank you. Anecdotally, a few years ago, I was in Vietnam, and in Vietnam, where obviously you've got all the mopeds and such like, and a wee old woman said, you just walk, people will avoid you. And it worked, bizarrely. Malcolm, I've got a question for you in terms of the engineering, and I'm thinking back to as a child growing up in the 70s and starting to ride a bike in the early 70s, and the number of cars that were on the road, etc. at that point in time. And whilst I'm not really a great advocate of cycle lanes, because I'd much rather that people could all actually run on the same road and actually do it properly and take care of each other. I kind of wonder if we have to, as generations, go to the point of going, right, separate people out, and in years to come, and probably by the time you're retired, it will come through that maybe we'll be able to do away with those cycle lanes, because motorists and cyclists, pedestrians will all have learned about how to look after each other on the roads and take care of each other. What's your thoughts on that as an engineer?
My thoughts are, so I would probably, like, you know, talking about in the early 70s. So recently we finished a project at Charing Cross, and that was initially designed with the way that you walk at the moment. That wasn't actually there was an afterthought to have pedestrians that were meant to go a circuitous route over flyovers and things like that. I think that there's potential. I'd say there's hope and potential, you know, and the one reason I would say that is that there's potentially driverless cars. So if you remove the human element from the vehicle, how does that vehicle react? Obviously, there's issues with recognizing, identifying, that sort of thing. But does that potentially make things safer? You know, I don't know, I could throw it back and say, what do you think?
Yeah.
It's about safety, it's about pleasure as well, and I would like being safe and it's a much more pleasant, cycling experience, and that's not just down to, you know, dying or being, you know, hit by a vehicle. I've been cycling for decades, and I have to say in the last certainly 10 years, like cycling in Glasgow is hugely easy. And I think there's a long way to go, but you know, I can cycle now all over Glasgow, out to Cunningar, Southside, and not really go near roads. But that takes a little bit of insider knowledge, and I wish some women that are new to cycling could find it a little bit easier to navigate around the city with, you know, on lovely Kelly City.
Like this city things would have to be.
So-
I think the city things would have to maintain them, like there's a cycle lane in Wilton Drive and it's got those armadillo things. And they're just an accident waiting to happen, plus the actual cycle lane itself is full of debris. It's full of debris.
Do you know what? I would agree with you, like 100%. There's no point building these things if we're not going to maintain them. I think there is a commitment from Glasgow to do that. You know, I can't comment on the specific, you know, I'll talk about anything I was involved in and I'm happy to. Anything that's I'm not involved in, I don't really want to talk about in terms of that. But maintenance wise, I would totally agree with you. There's no point having them
No,
full
well,
out.
we have found this
Yeah.
fancy, it's the simple, the place, but not if you're.
So I'm glad I didn't have a Casper Schmeichel moment there when you threw the ball. So just a comment on the travel thing. I think in our experience here in Glasgow is that there's lots of drivers, whereas in Europe there's lots of people that are multimodal. So they've got lots of experience walking, cycling. I think we've got too many people who all they do is drive and walk from their house to the car, and that's it. My question is around speed limits. I'm mindful that the PC is no longer here, but I was conscious of one of the comments he made about the resource that a serious incident takes, and that covers yourself, Ros, all the way through that whole process. But there does seem to be some friction between, I'm going to say the road authority level or the local authority level who set speed limits, but then it's Police Scotland that have to enforce the speed limits. And it feels like a no-brainer to say, right, obviously there's the 20-mile-an-hour proposals, but there's certain roads that are not being reduced that potentially should be reduced. And I'm going to say consistencies work out in the west of the city around by Victoria Park, and you've got sections that go 30, 40, 30, and then you're onto the expressway at 50. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. You know, we hear from Police Scotland, well, nothing will happen until someone gets injured or killed. We hear, well, unless there's engineering done, if it's just paint and signage, we're not going to support speed reduction. And then from the council's perspective, it's like often it's, oh, well, the police are not going to support this, so we're going to do that. I just wondered what your thoughts are on that speed reduction debate.
So in terms of that, I think Glasgow has aspirations to have the entire city as a 20-mile-an-hour zone. One of the sort of issues with that is that quite a bit goes into it, actually, before you can reduce the speed. So you have to take a speed survey, first of all, to find out the existing speed of the road. So, and at some point, if it's above a threshold, it's something like 24 miles an hour. I can't remember off the top of my head. But at that point, you need to install traffic calming measures and things like that to have it down and classified at a 20. So I think there's, you know, if they can do away with the requirement for additional infrastructure, but again, it's hard because then you're looking at trying to control that behavior. To, you know, how are you doing that? Who is actually going to enforce it? You know, the best way probably to enforce it is by having good conscientious drivers that drive at the correct speed limit, and everybody else has to sit behind them. But you know, that's not a particularly great solution either. Sorry.
Yeah, just getting out the back.
I was quickly on that. I was just saying we had we're watching eagerly what's happening in Wales at the moment, because what they did was they changed legislation at a high level where a restricted road which historically a restricted road is a 30-mile-an-hour road with a system of street lighting. A restricted road is now 20 mile an hour with a system of street lighting, and they've done it blanket across Wales. So we're watching, we're seeing what's happening there and how people respond to it. Just one more.
So I come along London Road, which is great. It's they're having segregated lanes. What I'm wondering is if there's any move to change how lights are happening for bikes. So the ones that I come along frequently fail, especially in poor conditions. I think maybe the piezo sensor fails when there's water in it or something like that. Happens quite a lot in Glasgow. And also there is really an issue where they don't trigger if you pass through a light when all of the lights are on red. And so I'm wondering, is there a move to improve like those options? I'm interested because actually one of the things you said earlier was really important, that you're considering why you would need to stop us a little bit more often than maybe you would like. So that's fair enough. That explains one of the parts of it, but it's really problematic. I've waited 4 times before and watched a stream of cyclists who ignore the red lights go past me, trying to trigger these repeatedly. And I know how they work, and I still can't manage to make them trigger.
So yeah, we're always looking at new technologies, and money is always a driving factor. So cutting a loop in the carriageway and sticking cables in there and putting in solar powered kind of units to power all this costs a lot of money. So you're going to want to look at different options. At present, it's been decided that the piezoelectric sensor is the most reliable that we've got. But what I have seen is trials of radar, microwavable detection. Again, it's not something I'm directly involved in, but the feedback that I have heard is that they're not as reliable at this stage. But looking at the AI technology that we're using to monitor junctions, the potential is there. It just requires a certain product to be able to do a similar job.
So without changing any of the infrastructure, you could just set the lights up to go around to cycles automatically?
In terms of that, you probably could, but every junction that we install is effectively, it's on adaptive control. So in terms of, you'll kind of get the same amount of time, you'll generally get the same sequence. So, if you use a junction often, you'll probably be able to predict these things. But in terms of that...
yeah, but it's automatic for the cars, but the cycles only work if it's triggered.
Yes, so it depends, again, what you're using. So, like, if you have that route on Garskip Road that I mentioned, if I phase you in with a car, that phase is always going to run. The thing with cycles and pedestrians is if there's nobody there, there's no need to run the cycle. Effectively, the junction's less efficient. So, in terms of looking at it like that, it's not about motor traffic being dominant. It's purely about it being efficient. So
I think that's a fair point, but I think we also need to measure efficiency with people being significantly disadvantaged as a result of actually keeping to the law, which is what's happening to me literally daily.
Yeah, we need stuff that works. Look, I appreciate that. I haven't experienced those sort of problems in piezoelectrics. I do find them quite reliable, but I don't know the London Road route very well myself. So, yeah.
Hey folks, I know there's probably still a lot more questions in the room, but time is creeping up on us. So we do, in fact, first of all, can we give our panel members a big round of applause?